Welcome to This Explainer. Right now, regulatory agencies are quietly drafting a ground-up overhaul of exactly how we govern both pharmaceutical drugs and medical devices. And honestly, this marks what could be the absolute biggest legislative shift in this space in over 40 years. We're going to break down exactly why the old rulebooks are basically being thrown right out the window. Because for decades, the legal frameworks governing complex biological interventions and the advanced hardware used to treat us have been totally tangled together in this massive regulatory knot. But according to recent government white papers and proposed legislative drafts, regulators have finally hit a breaking point. They're officially acknowledging that modern medicine has completely and totally outgrown its mid-20th century legal foundations.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, the need for change. Second, the pharma overhaul. Third, regulating modern medical devices. And finally, what this all means for you. All right, let's jump straight into part one, the need for change, and take a look at the current landscape.
I mean, we really have to ask ourselves this fundamental question. Why on earth would you regulate a pacemaker like a pill? For decades, legacy frameworks forced regulatory agencies to evaluate complex hardware using legal definitions that were specifically built for chemical compounds. And you can probably guess, it created massive compliance bottlenecks. When you try to apply a pharmacological toxicity test or a bodily absorption standard to something like a neurostimulator's lithium battery, the friction becomes completely obvious. Early on, these devices were just squeezed into the legal definition of drugs simply because agencies needed some sort of jurisdictional hook to oversee them. But today, that regulatory kludge results in profound inefficiencies. It's slowing down approvals for vital tech while simultaneously creating these huge safety blind spots.
It's a complete regulatory mismatch. Pharmaceutical oversight rightly relies on molecular biology, double-blind clinical trials, and pharmacokinetics, but modern medical device oversight, that requires rigorous cybersecurity audits, software debugging, and mechanical stress testing. Honestly, regulating AI diagnostic algorithms or Bluetooth-enabled insulin pumps with the exact same legal framework written for penicillin in the 1970s is literally like trying to use a cookbook to repair a jet engine. The compliance pathways simply do not speak the same language as the technology they are actually trying to govern.
So the crucial point here is that regulators are finally moving to cut this tangled red tape. According to the latest proposed legislative drafts, the plan is to establish two completely distinct, purpose-built regulatory tracks. Rather than just layering more and more amendments onto an exhausted legal framework, they are decoupling the systems entirely. One track will be specifically optimized for the science of advanced pharmaceuticals, and the other will be entirely dedicated to the engineering and iterative nature of modern medical devices.
Moving right along to Section 2, overhauling pharma regulations and modernizing our drug rules.
Under this massive overhaul, the pharmaceutical track is getting a much-needed modernization of its own. Because think about it, drug development has shifted so heavily toward personalized medicine, biomarker-driven oncology treatments, and biologics. To keep up with all of that, regulators are completely updating how clinical trials are evaluated. The new pharma framework focuses heavily on adaptive clinical trial designs. This is a big deal because it allows researchers to adjust parameters in real time based on early data, rather than being locked into rigid, decade-long study structures. It also incorporates guidelines for decentralized clinical testing and advanced chemical purity standards for complex synthetics. Meanwhile, the device track officially pivots to an entirely different regulatory vocabulary. Compliance over there will heavily weigh things like mitigating software glitches, calibrating digital sensors, and enforcing strict cybersecurity protocols against hacking. By legally splitting these definitions, governments can finally deploy dedicated pharmacologists to streamline drug approvals while staffing the device side with specialized biomedical engineers and data scientists. It just makes sense.
Which brings us to Section 3, regulating modern medical devices and opening up an entirely new playbook. To make sure we're on exactly the same page, we need to define what falls under this umbrella today, because the modern medical device spectrum is massive and highly technical. We aren't just talking about physical tools like scalpels, syringes, and bandages anymore. The absolute biggest driver of this regulatory shift is what the industry calls software as a medical device, or SAMD. Think about this. If a specialized AI application on your smartphone scans a dermatological image to diagnose a potential melanoma, that raw code is legally classified as a medical device. That reality requires an entirely new, highly agile framework to ensure something as simple as a background operating system update doesn't inadvertently alter a life-or-death diagnostic algorithm. The regulations absolutely have to govern the iterative nature of software, where patches and updates are pushed out weekly, not just once at the point of initial manufacturing.
So this policy shift targets three primary objectives. First, safety.
Ensuring a wireless update to a cardiac implant is completely immune to external hacking or data corruption, which is absolutely crucial. Second, speed. Stripping away completely irrelevant pharmacological testing hurdles so biomedical engineers can actually get life-saving hardware and software to the market faster. And third, clarity. Giving developers and venture capital a predictable, logical legal framework that actually incentivizes investment in advanced health tech rather than burying them in ambiguous compliance paperwork meant for chemical manufacturing.
Finally, let's look at Section 4, what this means for you and how this impacts patient care.
Let's translate this dry government policy into what actually happens in the real world. This overhaul creates a clear, powerful domino effect for the entire healthcare system. Step 1. Clearer regulations tailored precisely to specific technologies immediately remove that legal ambiguity from the development pipeline. Step 2. This lack of regulatory friction totally accelerates innovation. Biomedical and pharmaceutical companies can actually spend their capital on real research and development rather than navigating contradictory legal battles and redundant compliance tests. And ultimately, Step 3. This all culminates in better patient care. When you walk into a clinic, you can be completely confident that the personalized biologics treating you and the AI-driven machines diagnosing you are held to the most modern, rigorous, and technologically relevant safety standards in the world.
Stopping the regulation of pacemakers like pills is a massive, incredibly necessary leap forward for modern medicine. But as personalized genetic medicine, synthetic biology, and nanotech continue to rapidly accelerate, I want to leave you with this thought to ponder. Will these newly modernized frameworks remain agile enough to safely govern tomorrow's innovations, or are we simply setting the stage for another massive regulatory overhaul a decade from now? It's a fascinating challenge for the future of health technology. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and I will see you next time.